committee, this public hearing to order for the purposes of hearing two bills. Bill 207-33 COR. There's some reverberation here, so I think it's because the first bill on the agenda is creating a lot of feedback, static. Sarge is no, I know we're on, but it's reverberating. We're gonna take a recess, short recess. Okay, we'll try again. I would now like to call this Committee on Rules, Federal, Foreign, and Micronesian Affairs, Human and Natural Resources, Election Reform, and Capital District public hearing to order for the purposes of hearing two bills, Bill 207-33 COR and 241-33 COR. And let me see. Do you have the statement regarding the when the public hearing was called and here? Oh, this one here it is. Yeah, sorry. It's okay. So in accordance with the open government law, notices of this hearing were sent to all main media outlets, all senators and stakeholders 5 days in advance on January 26, and a second notice was sent on January 29, 2016. I'd like to recognize and thank my colleagues for being here this morning. Senator Nerissa Underwood. Thank you, Dr. Underwood. And to my left are Senators Brant McCreadie and Senator Tony Atta, our minority leader. And so the first bill on the agenda is an act to add certain sections of the code relative to prohibiting legislative travel at government expense, and I'd like to give an opportunity to the sponsor if he wishes. Not okay. The sponsor directs us to the title of the bill, which is self-explanatory. And so because nobody signed up to testify in this bill has been deemed publicly heard. Thank you, Senator McCreadie. And so the next bill, well, the bill speaks for itself, right? So the next bill is Bill 241-33. It's an act to add certain sections of the code to establish a recycling industry economic stimulus program and to provide a continuing appropriation for this purpose from the recycling revolving fund revenues. And I'd like to invite Mr. Bob Perrone. Thank you, Mr. Perrone, for being here so we can have some kind of significant dialogue relative to this bill. You certainly wear two hats. One hat as chairman of the Environmental Protection Agency Board that's tasked to oversee the implementation of the Recycling Revolving Fund. And the other hat as an individual who's involved in community-based recycling initiatives. And so I'd like to read my sponsor statement just so we're very clear about what I'm attempting to do here. The Recycling Revolving Fund was established more than a dozen years ago to provide a funding source for recycling programs and projects. In the intervening years, the record has been clear that this funding has not always been used for valid recycling purposes. The history prompted the public auditor in July of last year to call for a moratorium on Recycling Revolving Fund expenditures until GEPA adopts rules and regulations. Today, GEPA has not submitted for legislative approval the rules and regulations called for by the public auditor. This has not entirely stopped Guam Environmental Protection Agency from spending from the Recycling Revolving Fund. Most recently and controversially, for pickup purposes, for pickup trucks for the mayors. The acquisition of these vehicles may have merit, but very few members of the community would agree that it is a valid use of recycling fund monies. In the absence of rules and regulations that would provide for proper use of the Recycling Revolving Fund for government recycling programs, projects, I believe that the best use of these monies would be to support recycling efforts that are being undertaken and carried out right now in the community in the private sector. Bill 2041-33 provides economic stimulus for private sector recyclers by paying them $30 for each ton of solid waste recycled. This would help recyclers to cope with dropping prices for commodities and provide incentives and working capital for expanded recycling operations. To qualify for this economic stimulus, a private sector recycler must be licensed to do business on Guam and perhaps more importantly hold a Guam EPA permit for the storage and disposal of recyclable materials. The most recent statistics from Guam Environmental Protection Agency shows that 40,000 tons are recycled annually. Using this data as a base, the annual cost of this stimulus would be about $1.2 million, half the annual revenues of the Recycling Revolving Fund. Based on advice from GIPA staff, Bill number 241-33 also proposes to contract with private firms for a public relations effort to promote recycling and to advance the implementation of the Guam Zero Waste Program to minimize the impact on the island's landfill. In essence, Bill 241-33 provides for utilization of the private sector to advance this community's recycling goals until such time as Guam Environmental Protection Agency's rules and regulations are adopted and approved in accordance with the Administrative Adjudication Act. I hope for not only my colleagues' approval of this measure, but also their input and that of the public for changes that may improve this measure. So, having read that, I again invite Mr. Perron.
Mr. Chair, if we can just take a 1-minute recess as the bill is missing page 3.
Okay.
Yeah, just a 1-minute recess. They're getting copies right now.
Thank you for your
Okay, we'll reconvene this public hearing, and thank you, Senator Ada, for pointing out that the bill is missing a page number. And so I again like to welcome Mr. Perron to this roundtable, this public hearing discussion on the matter of Bill 241. And as I read in my sponsor statement, the whole purpose is to provide some kind of bridge from the time EPA submits the rules and regs to the legislature through the AAA process until such time that happens. What this bill would do is it would take all $1.2 million of the $2 million that's generated annually, and it would just tie it up so that we can really move forward with community-based recycling efforts. And as we've talked about, Mr. Perron for a while now, and I worked with the administrator of the Guam Environmental Protection Agency and their staff to put this bill together. I believe if the legislature passes this bill and the governor signs it, we can almost guarantee that at least $1.2 million will be allocated and appropriated toward these recycling initiatives. And so that's the whole intent. Over the last 12 years since the inception of this fund, we've seen an erosion of $12 million transferred out of the Recycling Revolving Fund. As I pointed out in my statement, we've seen purchases done from the Recycling Revolving Fund that may not be related to recycling efforts, may or may not be directly or indirectly related, as well as other expenses out of that fund. And I'm asking my colleagues to support this effort, because if we don't try to improve the integrity and increase the public trust towards the administration of this fund, the only option we would have in the legislature is to repeal the fund entirely. And so before we get to that point, if we're not already there, the idea behind this bill is to just subsidize these recycling efforts. And the way it would work is different from what we thought of originally, where we would have the EPA board from month to month certify what types of recyclables are not as profitable. At one point we talked about plastic bottles, At that time, scrap metal was very high, but now it's not as marketable as it was. And so instead of relying on the board to make the certification based on those market conditions, we just decided that we would just give a $30 subsidy across the board. And the benefit to this is that if the recycler is recycling those commodities that are profitable, this subsidy will certainly help to maybe hire more people, create this kind of clean movement toward recycling initiatives. If the company chooses to move forward and recycle those commodities that aren't as profitable, like plastic bottles, if they see that this $30 per ton subsidy will allow them to get these plastic bottles off the island, then certainly this bill would aid toward that effort as well. And it's administratively, it's very simple. The recycler would just give invoice or billing to the EPA, showing them how much tons they carted and what kind of material they were able to recycle off the island, and they would get this subsidy immediately. So I just want to generate your thoughts. We've been in contact with all the other recycling companies on the island, and sometimes because these public hearings are in the morning, it's hard, as I imagine it's hard for you to have to get away from work to be here. So just want to get some thoughts to see if we're headed in the right direction with this bill and if it has some merit to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, Senator. I'm glad to be here to lend any expertise that I have in the matter. We are probably the largest overall recycler on Guam Waste Control. So most of the things I'll talk about are mainly from the Guam Waste Control, Guam Waste Recycling area versus the EPA area. You know, I'll jump back and forth a little bit, but primarily my observations are based on what I see as an active recycler out there. Yeah, right now recycling commodities are really low all across the board. Plastic is the worst by far. Yeah, plastic, we're paying $260 a ton to discard it or to recycle it, because we give it to Pyramid Recycling, who does the baling and the loading and the shipping off island of the material. So they charge us the $260 in order to cover their processing cost and their equipment cost and things such as that. So cardboard, plastic is the biggest issue, the biggest problem right now, which is directly related to the price of oil, because plastic is made out of oil, and oil is in the really low stages right now. Mixed paper is probably around break even, I would say, as far as a commodity goes. You're just kind of existing. You're not really making much money at it. Cardboard is still in the positive range, but that's sliding as well. So that could get into the unprofitable range in the near future as well. Scrap metal, you're looking at about a negative $100 a ton to get rid of that. You used to get paid for scrap metal, now you have to pay to get it off island. So I think a subsidy to the industry is very much needed for somebody like us that recycles pretty much everything. The across the board, works fairly well, because some items we may be slightly profitable on, some we're largely negative on. So the combined $30 for everything kind of brings us to a good place. If you're only doing, say, cardboard and you're getting subsidized for doing that, then you're probably a little over enriched. So yeah, I don't know the perfect answer for it as far as how you would be able to target commodity by commodity and what you would index against and things like that. So it seems like just doing it across the board is a good idea, but some are going to be overly enriched and some probably a little bit under, but in the
And that's okay
aggregate.
too, right?
Mhm.
Because the end result would mean that these solid waste materials are being carted off the island.
Right, at
And
least.
that's the goal. It's not to recycle them into the landfill.
Right,
That's
right,
not
yeah.
recycling at all.
Yeah, it's just that it will, some of these people, stop doing plastic, say, because that's still, even with the 30, highly negative, where cardboard if they get an additional 30 on top of making some money now, that could be even more attractive to them. But plastic is really where it needs to be the emphasis right now. In fact, we're doing the single stream recycling for the government of Guam, for GSWA, where all your residential trash comes to us, we sort it, and then we get it over to the recycling centers. And plastic, we're negative 7,000 a month on plastic right now. We used to get a penny a pound or something for it. Now we're negative 260 a ton. So that's really made a negative difference, on our end. So, the across the board will work. It's just that, I wish we could figure out a way to target it, but I can't think of it. And I talked to our broker in LA that handles all our commodities, and he's supposed to be looking to see if he has any ideas how we could kind of target it a little more to where it's needed the most and less to where it's needed the least, but it's complicated.
Well, that's what I wanted to do. From the beginning, I wanted to look at those commodities that aren't as profitable as the others. And at the time, as I said, we talked about plastics. So if you said plastics is like negative $266 to recycle, I wanted to find a way for this recycling revolving fund to subsidize that lost dollar for dollar.
Right.
So at least it'll bring the recycler to a break-even point, so that current operations, current staffing levels will be maintained, and nobody will lose their job as a result of that particular commodity going down.
Yeah.
Then we talked about leaving it up to the board to certify on a monthly basis, but these things go up and down so quickly
Right,
that
they do.
you know, it's difficult. And I'm glad that you admitted it's difficult, because
It is.
ideally, what we talked about doing and what I wanted to do with this legislation is make it so that as a recycler, if you can demonstrate to EPA that you used to make X amount of money to recycle X product, and then now you're losing X amount of money, they should be able to subsidize that. But it's it's difficult.
Yeah, because you've got other things that enter into the cost here, such as shipping.
Yeah.
Shipping is such a huge cost here versus in the U.S. So the U.S. Indexes don't take into account the shipping costs we have from Guam. So if you used an index in the States, you'd have to modify that in order to accommodate the shipping cost, and because it's highly expensive to ship from here. To ship
Right.
from here to Japan, the recyclables we send now, which is tires, we're paying about $3,500 to $4,000 a container. Plastic going to China, you're looking at $250 to $300, or $2,500 to $3,000 a container. So the shipping cost is a real thing that influences
So in the case of
recycling.
paper, you said it's kind of zero, right?
Yeah, it's kind of break even. We
If this
get about
subsidy were provided, do you think the recycler will be encouraged to recycle paper now?
I think so. That's probably one of the items that we're recycling the least, that has the most potential. Because right now our company ships 25 40-foot containers of cardboard a month off island. Mixed paper, we probably ship 3 or 4 containers. So there's a lot of paper that's still going in the landfill that could be recycled. So that's, if we can encourage that more and get the commercial customers in particular to do more of that recycling, it would be very helpful, and I think it would increase our recycling rate quite a bit as well and extend the life of Lejon.
And then this bill kind of provides a bridge until the rules and regs have been adopted. But there's nothing that would prevent this same program to be emulated in those same rules and regs.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was why it was written. It wasn't written to micromanage the operations of EPA, but to just comply with the public auditor's request to not have any more expenditures out of this fund until those rules and regs are adopted. So this bill provides that interim mechanism to be able to provide for this kind of stimulus.
Yeah, I've checked with the agency, and we're not doing any expenditures out of there other than the payment of Sabrina's salary. So that's the only thing coming out of the revolving recycling fund right now.
Have you taken this item up with the board?
I don't think we had a board meeting since this came out. We've got a meeting coming up in a couple weeks.
But you've had informal discussions though, right?
Yeah, I had a discussion with Eric a couple of days ago,
Yeah.
I know, and asked him if he was going to be attending, and he said he'd be sending a written testimony. But I haven't discussed it with the other board members at this point. But I can, I will. Yeah.
Okay, I'll invite my colleagues to give input or ask questions. Okay, so, okay.
So just so that we clarify for general public, of course, our ultimate goal in providing support for recycling is for the benefit of our environment and to ensure that we encourage our communities to be more conscious, right, about how they use the materials, how they, for me, my husband always reminds me about bottled water versus, using some, one of those, not recyclable, but yes, filter and so on. So I just want to make sure that, again, I know that this is to subsidize the recycling programs, but in the front end, to meet our goal to protect our environment, I just want to clarify again, what programs do we have to ensure that we educate our community, to ensure that, we really minimize, the need for recycling, and really to protect our environment.
Well, I know EPA gives some presentations to the schools, and I talked to Glenn San Nicolas the other day about it, and he showed me where they had just given some presentations to the teachers at a couple of the different high schools, and they were going to go ahead and pass that on to the faculty and the students and try to build some of that into their curriculum. But I think there's a lot more that could be done with outreach and public education and stuff that currently isn't being done, and that could be another use for the revolving recycling fund, is to use it for education, and particularly with the kids and particularly with schools, because that's where you're going to get the changes from the next generation coming up. Yeah, so I think that would be very helpful to have Guam EPA work with the schools on a type of curriculum or on presentations to help the schools.
Thank you. Got it. So, okay, thank you for pointing that out, Senator. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, and also, Senator Underwood has an excellent question, and that's why on page 4, we're providing for $100,000 to contract a private firm to promote recycling in the community, and an additional $300,000 to a private firm to implement the zero waste tolerance program. And of course, these will all be done through the bidding process, so there's no one that's been identified at this point.
Okay, perfect.
Just to be clear, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I just want to, because $30 a ton doesn't look like it's a lot. And so I've had to wrap my mind around $30 a ton being significant, or at least enough to provide that kind of bridge financing support to keep the recycling companies afloat, because it's a very tough business to be involved in. And this is why we believe that recycling only exists when it's subsidized by the community, some way, somehow. And so is $30 a ton significant? That's $30 for every 1,000 pounds. Is that?
Well, it's significant for most commodities except plastic.
Yeah.
At the 2.6, but the tonnage for
Yeah.
plastic is much lower than the other ones also.
Yeah.
So plastic tonnage, what are we doing? Maybe 20, 25 tons a month. That's probably all that's being recycled in plastics. So it's not a very large commodity tonnage-wise. So the impact of the $30 will be felt more in the other areas, in the area of
Scrap metal
and cardboard and the mixed papers and things of that nature. So yeah, even though it's the largest negative at 260, except the tonnage isn't as much as the others. So
Yeah, when the fund was first established, the number one priority was the scrap metal recyclables, and that was at that time, this fund had to subsidize, I believe, like $50 or $100 per vehicle or something like that, to the tune of millions, in order to get all these vehicles recycled off the island, as opposed to stockpiled and then having another eyesore created by that effort that was supposed to beautify our island and protect the environment.
Sure.
Okay. So we'll be hoping to get some written testimony from EPA,
Okay.
just so that the legislature can have some record that this is really being done in cooperation with the department that's tasked to administer this revolving fund.
Yeah, I'll follow up with Eric and make sure that he's, he said he was going to file something with you, so I'll check with him on it.
Okay, and so there's no other testimony for this bill. This bill has been deemed publicly heard, and that I'll continue to work with with EPA and with my colleagues to see if it's possible to bring this to the floor in the February session. But thank you for your support and your guidance regarding this initiative.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we're going to recess until 10 o'clock. So, yeah. Well, we normally give 10 days or when we have session, whichever comes first. Yeah. Okay, so we're recessed till 10 o'clock, so we could have that round table. Okay. Gonna stay for